Are your tomato plants taking over the garden? Well, mine were. After stepping away from the garden for a full week, they were taking over the garden. And I want to show you today what you can do to keep your tomato plants under control.
It was a busy week for us, and we were gone every day of the week with activities. But now that we're back, there has been a lot of growth and a lot of awesome, exciting things going on. So first, before I start trellising and pruning, let's do a quick harvest.
This is so exciting because this is the first of our big tomatoes. We've had lots of cherry tomatoes. These are the first of the big ones. They look so good. Beautiful. I just picked a whole bunch of tomatoes yesterday. I picked over 2 pounds of cherry tomatoes. And here I am, 24 hours later, still a lot to pick. While I'm over here, I'm going to grab some basil because we need this for cooking today. So here's our beautiful harvest for the day. This wasn't supposed to be a harvest video, but I couldn't help myself because I definitely needed to harvest some stuff for cooking today, and just because a lot of things were ready to be picked. So we got some tomatoes, basil and oregano. We got a ton of kale that we're going to use today to make our soup, and I'm also going to make some kale chips, and then lots of celery. Now that I got that harvesting out of the way, I am ready to begin, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to trellis and prune indeterminate tomato plants. First, let's get some things out of the way. It is important to note that what I'm going to show you can only be done to indeterminate tomato plants. I would not recommend it for determinate tomato plants. Indeterminate tomato plants are the types of plants that will continue to grow as long as the season allows. They will continue to grow side shoots, which are also known as suckers, and I'm going to show them in a little bit. And the plant will just go wild. They will produce an indeterminate amount of tomatoes until the frost kills them. Because of that, we can prune them without causing harm to the plant or without reducing the yield. There are different ways of pruning, and some people like to prune their tomato plants to what is called a single stem tomato plant. And if you can see here, this would be an example of a single stem tomato because the whole plant is just one straight stem. So that means that all the other stems that grow on the sides get pruned out, and you keep just one central leader, one central stem. Other people like to prune their tomato plants to two stems, two central stems. You can see in this plant, that's what I did. I started out as a one stem until you can see how the stem forks a little bit. And then now all of a sudden I have two stems, two central leaders. So let's take a look at what I've done with this plant so far. So if you guys can see, I have been pruning at the bottom because I want to make sure that there is enough space between the soil and the leaves. So I've done all the pruning at the beginning stages of this plant, but if you can see here, this is new growth, and this could potentially become a new tomato plant, and I don't necessarily want that. So I am just going to prune those and cut those out. Other things I'm going to prune at the bottom are these vines that I no longer need because this is where the tomatoes were. And I have several of those because we have already picked all the fruit that was growing at the bottom. So as I'm going up, I also want to cut some of the leaves that are towards the bottom. Now this is where things get interesting. Right here, this is what we call a sucker. This sucker could potentially become a new tomato plant all on its own. And for what I'm doing, for trellising my tomatoes, I don't want that. Now, the way that you can tell the difference between a sucker and just a leaf is, if you can see this leaf, it's exactly what it looks like. Nothing but just a leaf. And it comes to an end. But the sucker usually grows at a 45-degree angle between the main stem and a leaf. And then also, it continues to grow, and then it is growing its own set of leaves, and in many cases, it is growing some flowers, like I have some here. Again, I don't want this sucker in this plant, so I am going to prune this. So as I work my way up this plant, I need to look and check to see if there are any more suckers. So as I'm looking here at the bottom, I don't see any more. So I'm going to keep moving my way up. And as I was doing that, I found this big sucker. Now I have a decision to make. I have to decide whether I'm going to prune this sucker out. And you guys can see it is so big. And you could keep this one if you wanted to. But for what I'm doing right here in this space, this will not be good for my plant. So I am actually going to remove this one. Here is another one, another small sucker that I am just going to prune. Here's another one. This is also another big one. I am going to prune this one as well. You will see in a little bit where there have been some instances that I decided not to get rid of a sucker. And I do that very intentionally, and I will explain to you why I do that in my method. Here is an instance where I decided to keep this sucker, which begins down here and is already this tall. I decided to let this plant have 2 main leaders. But you can see that from this sucker, there's already a lot of other little suckers that are coming up. Those ones I'm going to remove because I don't want my plant to just get super wild. I want to be able to maintain it. The other thing that I'm doing as I go through this, I am also trellising up my plant. That means I am helping it weave back and forth on the rungs of this cattle panel trellis. But this one right here is a little too tall for me to bend and make it go underneath this. So I'm just going to tie it right here because I don't want to risk snapping my plant. So I will get a bit of string right here, and I'm going to loosely tie my plant. So this is the point where I started getting 2 main leaders, or 2 main stems. One that veers off to the left and then one slightly to the right. But if you see this stem, there is a lot of craziness going on. And I need to make sure I prune some of this and make sure everything is exactly the way I want it. So I'm going to follow the main stem, and again, I'm looking for suckers, and I see some small ones that I want to make sure I get them before they get bigger. And right as I was coming up the main stem, I noticed that now I have 2 main stems. Do you see? Because this one here was a sucker that I didn't get in time, and it is now a whole big stem with its own suckers and its own tomato plants and with its own tomatoes and flowers. And when it gets to be this big, for me at least, it's very hard to decide what to do. So I really avoid allowing my plants to get to this point. But it happened, and it happens sometimes. I already have 2 central leaders in this plant. I cannot have this one. Not only is the plant going to be crowded and there's not going to be enough airflow for the plant, but also this one, because it's growing to the side, it's not going to have anything to hang on to. So I will get rid of this one. Those are some hard choices that we have to make sometimes. And now here, I have another little sucker that I need to make sure I pinch out. And as I'm doing this, I hope you can see the craziness going on here. Here is another sucker that also got really big. And then here's the one of the main stems that I wanted to keep. Notice how this main stem is kind of growing off to the side, it's starting to bend. I need to make sure I tie this one because this is the one I want to keep. And this is the sucker then that I'm going to remove. So here I am left with this. There are tiny little suckers forming, and that's about when you want to remove them, or even before that. Now I'm going to tie my plant to the post because that's my plan. That's what I want it to do. I want it to grow up this trellis. So I have to be gentle when I do this because the plant has been growing for a little while now in a different direction. And I want to make sure I don't hurt it. So again, I'm going to tie it a little bit loose. So right over here where I tied the plant, I hope you can see there is another sucker right here. And this one I'm going to remove because this is the main stem I want to keep. I just tied this stem to the post. But what I also want to do, I'm just going to move it this way. And because it's not so long, I can very gently help it weave through through one of these metal rungs. So now it's over here on this side, and then the hope is that it's going to continue to grow vertically, and then I'll be able to weave the plant in and out. So now this specific plant that I've been working on now has 2 main stems growing up from this plant, and I think there will be plenty of room for that. And then this plant is not going to be crowded.
And now I have to continue the same process for all my other plants. But if you're watching for the first time, let me introduce myself. My name is Laura. I am a wife and a mother of 2 boys. We are a homesteading, homeschooling family, sharing our journey, hoping to inspire others. Be sure to check out my other videos for garden tours, harvest videos, and more.
It is now the evening. I had to take a break. I couldn't finish everything this morning. It just got very hot and I had been out in the garden for hours. So I needed to take a break. So here I am again, back at it. It is nice and cool. You really have to stay on top of the pruning. And for the most part, I have. And I have come here almost daily just to check on everything. And one of my sons also is really good at this, and he helps me find all the suckers and just do everything that needs to be done for the maintaining of this. But even with that, there has been a lot of suckers that I've missed. It's crazy. And because this past week I wasn't in the garden, it just made things even more challenging. So this task right here is definitely overdue. So for this long sucker that got way out of control and is coming out of the trellis, I have the option of just completely cutting that out or I could tie it, and then this plant will have 2 main leaders. I think I'm going to tie it just because it's such a long one. There's been so much growth already. There's little tomatoes in there already, and we'll just have to see how it does. I am so pleased with how everything looks. The plants look great. So most of my plants are actually double stemmed, which means that I have trained up 2 main leaders, 2 main stems for the plant. This pruning has allowed me to open up room at the bottom of the plant for these basil plants to grow and just to thrive. These plants are looking amazing. I am so pleased with how everything turned out. And this is a method that works for me. As you have seen, this is quite a process, and not everybody wants to go through this. And not everybody prunes and stakes their indeterminate tomatoes. So this is just one way of growing indeterminate tomatoes, and this is the way that I prefer. And it is definitely more manageable for me, and that's the way I like it. So that's what I did today. I pruned and trellised 3 beds of indeterminate tomato plants. That is a total of about 30 plants. Thank you so much for coming along with me as I showed you how I trellis and prune my indeterminate tomato plants.